Welcome to the CAA 2022 webinar series. Today's webinar is Climate, Health and You, presented by Catherine O'Shea and proudly supported by NEEN by RAP. Thanks for joining us and please enjoy.
Welcome to Council of Ambulance Authorities webinar series. I'm Mojca Bizjak-Mikic, the General Manager at CAA, and I will be your host today. Today's webinar is a part of our Sustainability Month, celebrating World Environment Day. CAA set up our sustainability strategy in 2020, and while it's still in its early days, we are thrilled to have started seeing progress in our member services, moving them towards more sustainable organizations. Ambulance Victoria has been leading the charge, and we are grateful for their support around the CAA strategy and the first steps to help ambulance sector grow in this space. A big part of the Ambulance Victoria sustainability team is Catherine O'Shea, our speaker today. Currently a sustainability analyst with AV, she has been working on AV sustainability programs for over 2 years and helped develop their initiatives to inspire the rest of us to do better. Today, Catherine will take us back to the basics. What is climate change? How does this impact our health? And how does that impact our services? I'm thrilled to welcome Catherine today to hopefully inspire the next group of eager eco-warriors. Catherine, over to you.
Morning. Thank you for having me here speaking with you today. My name's Catherine O'Shea, and I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Bunurong people, the traditional custodians of the land from which I'm speaking this morning. That's the Mornington Peninsula in Victoria, and honour their elders past and present and all emerging. So today we're going to speak about climate and health and the connections between those. As I said, my name's Catherine O'Shea and I work with Ambulance Victoria in their sustainability team. Today we're going to look at some basic climate science and try to understand the links between climate change and health, look at some climate impacts that we experience in our everyday activities in the ambulance services, and think about ways that we can make a difference. Let's start with some climate science 101. Let's start by drawing a distinction between prediction and projection in terms of weather and climate. We all know what the weather is. We predict it over short periods of times. It's never quite right. We're never very happy with it. But really what we're doing is predicting it from minutes to hours to days. Sometimes we get a 7-day forecast, and it's made out of models that are perpetually being updated with information to keep them live and real, the real-time fed observations to validate and bring it as close to reality as possible before simulating the near future. They can give detailed and accurate short-term predictions, but they ignore lots of processes which are important to long-term climate change. On the other hand, climate modelling is done using supercomputers and based on sets of mathematical equations that describe the physical laws which govern the behaviour of the atmosphere and the ocean and their interaction with other parts of the Earth's climate system. So it's quite a different phenomena. These are very different kind of efforts, I guess, and the thing that we're going to move further into talking about is climate projections, and that's over decades. It spans over many years. Some of the climate modelling that's coming out now goes out as far as 2090, for example. What causes climate change? You might know this well already from your children or something. Basically, the sun shines down on our blessed Earth, and some of it is reflected back into the atmosphere, but most of it's absorbed by the land and the oceans, and it causes a kind of a natural warming of the Earth. You might think about this grey kind of, you could almost think about it like a doona or a snuggly blanket around the Earth, and whilst some of the heat radiates back from the Earth towards the atmosphere, it's kind of snuggled in by this doona effect, the greenhouse gases that keep that heat trapped in the atmosphere. That's all very natural kind of climate systems, but burning fossil fuels, agriculture and land clearing, those kind of things are increasing the amount of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere and trapping extra heat. So the extra heat trapped in the atmosphere causes the Earth's temperature to rise. Here's a climate projection that simulates the response of the climate system to a scenario of climate change. You can look at the climate model output as a time series. One model run gives a plausible time series for a particular climate scenario. You can see that squiggly line. And then the shading comes from an ensemble of models, meaning we consider more than just one model run to build a picture of the future climate. The future climate is expected to sit somewhere within that range. However, on a from year to year, variability plays out very unpredictably. There are certain things we do know about climate change, and they're quite upsetting, but here we go. The CO2 concentration in the atmosphere is the highest in at least 2 million years. Temperature in the last decade is warmer than the last 100,000 years, and sea level is rising at the fastest rates in at least 3,000 years. We know that climate change is widespread, rapid, and intensifying. Humans are unequivocally responsible for rising greenhouse gases, which are warming the planet. The rate of warming is unprecedented in the last 2,000 years, and many changes, such as melting ice sheets and sea level rise, are already irreversible for centuries to millennia. Other things about the Australian context specifically, that temperature has increased by 1.4 degrees since 1910. There's high confidence that human influence made extreme heat events more likely or more severe, including the summer of 2012 and 13, where more than 70% of Australia experienced extreme temperatures. The heat leading into the Black Summer bushfires of 2019-2020. Climate extremes are likely to increase into the future. We're going to have more heat waves, we're going to have more fire weather, more marine heat waves, more drought, and extreme rainfall. This future projection is what we can expect, and depending on our behaviours. We watched the red one climb up the highest, the 2070. This is a high emissions scenario. That's the kind of the do nothing scenario, and the middle kind of orangey coloured one is the do something scenario, and the bottom one, the low emission scenario, is the pull out all stops and do everything scenario. This is, the 1.5 degree warming world, which some say that we've already surpassed, but that is the trajectory of maximum action, and that's the one that I'm hoping for. So that's a little bit about climate science, but let's try and connect the dots now to climate and health. The discussions around climate and health started at a similar time to the discussions of climate change in the late 1990s, and kind of gained traction in the early 2000s, and argy-bargied around for a couple of decades. But I guess what I wanted to draw your attention to was the Lancet journal, who started kind of weighing in on this issue from about 2015, after the World Health Organization announced that the evidence is overwhelming. Climate change endangers human health. Solutions exist, and we need to act decisively to change this trajectory. So in response to that, this Lancet Countdown on Health and Climate Change was formed. A big bunch of researchers, multidisciplinary from many parts of the world, dedicated to monitoring the evolving health profile of climate change using 43 indicators. So I just will run through this quickly. I won't read it verbatim, but it's basically each year kind of getting stronger and stronger. Potentially changes are unequivocal, potentially irreversible, disproportionately affecting the health of vulnerable populations. 2018, it says that it's going to potentially disrupt core public health infrastructure and overwhelm health services. 2019 starts to get a bit flat, that nothing's happening. Progress is in mitigating is intermittent at best. Emissions continue to rise. Then we start getting smashed with the impacts, the measurable, demonstrable kind of climate changing. So that's how health has really kind of navigated climate change. That's been a benchmark kind of report that continues to feed us information. Interestingly, in 2021, the dialogue nuanced somewhat to suggest that whilst not acting on climate change may be the biggest threat to health of the 20th century and threatens to completely undermine progress in health outcomes of previous decades, acting on climate change might be the biggest opportunity of the 20th century. So it's starts to become a conversation more about co-benefits, I guess, of acting and trying to put a positive spin on the opportunities that we have to gain. And perhaps it's not unlike the sense of that we get from the challenges presented by COVID-19 and how we have pivoted to telehealth and teleconferencing, for example, and seen how emissions associated with the delivery of healthcare have fallen in some cases. The co-benefits are an interesting thing for health. We can consider this a double-edged sword, that if we do nothing, we seem to unpick all the progress that we've made in the last century, disrupt core public health infrastructure and overwhelm health services, whereas if we act, we stand to improve the health of our most vulnerable and create the circumstances for improved health outcomes. Now this slide starts to talk about some of the direct impacts of climate change and on health. So you've got the direct impacts in the middle, the rising temperatures, more extreme weather, sea level rise, and increasing levels of carbon dioxide, and the indirect impacts of severe weather, air pollution, changes in vector ecology, increasing allergens, water quality impacts, food and supply impacts, environmental degradation, and extreme heat. And these in turn are very much linked to health impacts that we experience in our daily professional life. So more air pollution means more asthma, more cardiovascular disease. Increasing allergens turns into respiratory allergies and asthma. Water and food supply impacts, malnutrition, diarrheal disease. We don't have that so much in Australia, but there's certainly been instances of it. What we do have is this extreme heat, which turns into heat-related illness and death, cardiovascular failure. That's very much a theme coming through the health and climate literature. We can also see, I guess, that if we turn this whole thing around and reduce temperatures and reduce the direct impacts and CO2 levels in the atmosphere, that we kind of start to reduce these indirect impacts too, and therefore reduce these health impacts. which is kind of what we were talking about, that seesaw between the biggest opportunity and the biggest threat. I guess a different way of just relating the same concept. You've got your direct impacts down on the left and the direct effects in the middle. And then you've got the kind of social dynamics, which the literature suggests that particular vulnerable cohorts of people are going to be affected more severely by climate change. And some of those might be the elderly or young people, people with disability, people with poor housing, people with chronic health issues or mental illness, even people renting or CALD, where English not their first language, new migrants, transient communities, international students and tourists, people that are homeless or experiencing other socioeconomic disadvantage. These people are equally or more impacted by the health impacts of climate change, or just the general impacts of climate change, but particularly we see them in health as infectious diseases, respiratory diseases, cardiovascular diseases, injuries, very real in our world. So when we're thinking about climate change adaptation, we need to ensure that services continue to provide for these particular cohorts, and we can start to design our service towards serving them better, knowing that some of this climate change is locked in for the foreseeable future. More about what we experience in our roles each day is heat waves. We can kind of tie all these things to a changing climate. Heat waves is kind of now termed the silent killer, really, and we know that trend is going to continue. This slide shows some of the health impacts that Victoria experienced during the significant heat waves in 2009 and 2014. So during the 2014 heat wave, Victoria experienced the hottest 4-day period on record at the time. Maximum temperatures were 12 degrees or more above average for much of Victoria, with parts of the state recording temperatures of 45 degrees or more on 3 consecutive days during the heat wave, and Melbourne experiencing temperatures in excess of 41 degrees each day between 14 and 17th of January 2014. The 2014 heatwave resulted in 168 excess deaths and a 5-fold increase in heat-related public hospital emergency presentations. Similarly, the 2009 heatwave, maximum temperatures between 12 and 15 centigrade above normal for Victoria, whilst Melbourne endured 3 consecutive days of temperatures above 43 degrees. The 2009 heatwave resulted in 374 excess deaths and 12% increase in public hospital ED presentations compared with the 5-year average. So amongst those 75 years and older, the increase was even more significant, with 39% increase seen compared with the 5-year average. Air quality. Action on climate change can simultaneously help and address other issues faced by society, improving air quality and public health, reducing health service costs, creating jobs, improving energy security, and preserving the natural environment. A quote here says that there is no safe known level of air pollution exposure for human health. Any decrease in pollution levels can have large health benefits and reduce healthcare costs. Bushfires, I don't think this will be, again, reinforcing that emergency service really are on the front line of climate change. These are the 1920 bushfires, along with a few headlines to recap on the distressing and confronting times for our services. I'm sure that your services have been the same with various things. Floods and again, storms and landslides that followed those bushfires. These images will be all too familiar for people from Queensland and New South Wales more recently. Something maybe a little bit less intuitive, vector-borne diseases. The rise in temperatures will enable viruses and diseases to spread more. It'll also kind of bring different kinds of flora and fauna push them into different territories and get them to interacting with new animals and things that they haven't interacted with before, and consequently interacting with humans. All this kind of stuff is a bit of an experiment that we don't know the impact of. There's been some science trying to unpack it, and it's pretty scary what the results that are coming out of those kind of simulations of when you kind of incorporate animals and temperature and migration and where things would migrate to. It's very much an unknown. I know at this stage I'm not telling you anything that you don't know already about the impact of these particular separate scenarios, but I guess what I think is important to recognise is that these things are going to happen more often, more intensely, and start piling up as climate change progresses if we keep going in the wrong direction. And I think that that dual crisis kind of planning is very much a part of how we need to rise to the challenge of climate change for ambulance services. In late 2020, our ambulance management unit worked with regional teams to ensure we could respond to concurrent events, and since then most of us have had to deal with floods, extreme storm events or bushfires while still managing the pandemic. One of the major considerations I've heard about was managing evacuation and relief centres and relocating residents while practicing social distancing. I could go on, but you get the message. With a degree of climate change already locked in, we will experience these weather patterns more intensely and more often, and we need to adapt and plan for that. It will be no surprise to anyone here that increases we see in mental health cases that travel alongside those events too. Eco-anxiety is now a term coined for this very legitimate experience, not to mention all those with pre-existing mental illness to be managed at such times. In 2020, Ambulance Victoria did a piece of work to develop our first climate adaptation action plan, and some of the things that we felt were pertinent about the impact on health services were the increasing demand for emergency services and complexity of response places growing strain on the workforce, leading to reduced employee retention, increased risk to people, and significant challenges for recruitment and training of people to meet operational needs. There's increased damage to assets and infrastructure, increased instances of energy and telecommunications network failure, just to name a few. I'm really full of good news, aren't I? But I guess to finish off this section really is to talk about organisational risk, and we've talked about the climate variable, we've talked about the climate-related hazard, we've talked about the organisational impact, but we haven't explicitly talked about organisational risk and climate risk. So just to mention really that the ultimate risk is an inability to meet demand and loss of life, diminished quality of our services, disruptions to business operations and activities, and increased costs to repair assets. and insurance claims. Again, just to name a few. So coming back to this diagram, if we accept that the elevated greenhouse gas emissions push our otherwise perfectly adapted climate systems to produce more extreme events more often, and that these present in the form of heat waves, drought, bushfires, floods, etc., and further that they go on to exacerbate issues such as undernutrition, cardiovascular and respiratory disease, and throw up new challenges for us, such as the migration of disease and increased stresses on our mental health, we must acknowledge that climate change is a health issue and that as health professionals, we really should be leading on it. I'm going to pause my voice now for a moment and show you this YouTube video, and it's from the Health Emergency Climate Change Forum in 2020. You'll notice that it's just before they're talking a lot about bushfires, and it's just on the cusp of COVID-19. And some might note our Victorian Chief Health Officer, Brett Sutton, passionate and willing to take a leadership role on this important issue of climate change. However, we all know what happened next.
I want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and their elders past, present and future, and welcome and thank any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that we have here with us tonight. So I just want to begin by quoting Guardian journalist Bridget Delaney, who captured some of the shock and pain of the recent catastrophe in an article in that newspaper. Bridget writes, "It's the first summer of this new decade. Welcome. It's the summer of ash, washed up on beaches, like a long, deranged message unfurled from its bottle. It's been the summer of 1 billion animals killed by flames and starvation, collapsed biospheres, charred forests, epic dust storms, hailstones and racing clouds carrying fire. Obstetricians have tweeted about delivering babies in smoke-filled operating theatres. One woman died after stepping off the plane into the smoky air in Canberra. Many other deaths and injuries and suffering will go unrecorded."
So the greatest risk to humanity at the moment and to society is failure to act on climate change, and the strongest link there will be through extreme weather. Of course, this actually impacts on involuntary migration, on governance failures, on social instability, food crises, human-made environmental disasters, failure of urban planning. All this is interconnected.
I'm Victoria's Chief Health Officer. I have said to my colleagues across the country that if Chief Health Officers were invented today, they would really be spending most of their time on climate change and its health effects, because it does genuinely represent an existential threat to our health and well-being, and the heat wave is really an example par excellence. The 374 excess deaths that occurred in 4 days of extreme heat in 2009, almost twice as much as those who died in the Black Saturday bushfires. And one of the challenges in communicating climate change as an existential threat to health is making it real for people, having that emotional connection. 374 is a number. My challenge is that I can't tell you who those 374 people are, but they're still real lives because they cause out-of-hospital cardiac arrests, stroke, people found deceased at home, and people who've collapsed and died on the way to hospital. We don't know that they were individually caused by climate change, but we do know that estimated excess deaths are extremely significant.
About 3 or 4 years ago, I wrote a book, one of the stories, and that was about a little old lady called Ruby who visited my emergency department leading into the heatwave event in Melbourne back in 2014. feisty 93-year-old lady lived at home in a red brick house in Brunswick with no ventilation, but she had water in the fridge, she had neighbours next door, and she had the air conditioning that she could sit by and keep her cool. Sadly, 2 days later, Ruby turned up in renal failure, unconscious, and subsequently died in our emergency department because the neighbours were away. The air conditioning didn't work, and that red brick house just kept getting hotter and hotter and hotter, and she basically, it was like an oven. And at that time, the World Health Organisation had declared that climate change is the fifth horseman of the apocalypse and encouraged doctors to speak up about illness caused by climate change.
So 2019 was the world's hottest and it's accelerating. Key point here from a health perspective is that if we could keep the warming, if we could limit it to 1.5 degrees instead of 2 degrees above warning, that would effectively protect 420 million people from being exposed to severe and lethal heat waves.
Air quality over this summer period. How do you protect 4.5 million people in Melbourne from hazardous air quality? You can ask people to temporarily relocate, maybe wear masks, stay inside, but it's an existential risk because millions of people are exposed and there is no known safe level of particulate matter. So even at a moderate air quality level, let alone high or very high or hazardous, there are impacts on health, and that includes modelled excess deaths for all of those days.
There are two important organs in the thorax, the right lung and the left lung. And I'm an advocate for both of them. This is the largest study of mortality that's been performed in 63 million American older people. And the correlation is the more pollution, the more mortality. But the really important finding is there isn't a lower limit. So as Brett said, there is no safe limit to poor air. Just to talk about bushfires, the direct effects are irritation of the mucosa of the lungs, so all of us will be prone to getting sort of acute irritative bronchitis if we're exposed to enough fire pollution, wood fire pollution. If we happen to have asthma, COPD or bronchiectasis, we're more likely to get an exacerbation and end up in hospital. And it's unclear what happens with chronic exposure. Those pictures are actually from the lungs of smokers, but exactly the same changes occur in people who live in huts that are heated by wood fire and in whom they also use wood fire for cooking. So it's likely that if we were exposed to long-term wood fire smoke, we'd get those changes.
For me, the smoke haze has been a global memorial to what we've lost. Humans, other living beings and places we love. It's also a global fire alarm for climate action. It remains a time of great grief and fear related to the horrific bushfires in much of Australia. Though some of the fires are out, the feelings remain. Behind the fires, there's the strong footprint of climate change. We can see it, we can smell it, it's personal, it's now, it's the future. It's frightening and confronting. For those on the front line of the fires, there's a high risk of mental illness, post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, depression and substance use disorder. These are more likely to be the case if feelings cannot be acknowledged and talked about. So we can all play a part if we know people who have been affected. We can listen to them. I've had personal experience of this, losing a house in Wye River in the Christmas Day 2015 bushfire. 5 years after Black Saturday, those on the front line still have high levels of mental illness. These types of problems occur in all acute climate-related weather events. On the other hand, more chronic problems, such as drought, are also likely to cause depression and, as mentioned before, suicide.
When you look at the suicide epidemic in rural and regional Victoria, out of the fires, out of the drought and the impacts on the economy and people's financial viability, suicide might be one of the greatest health impacts that we see in the short to medium term. We can make a difference. We should try to make a difference.
Taking real climate mitigation action is not only vital for the planet, but also for our mental health.
If we are to first do no harm, the doctors, nurses, other healthcare providers must be the strongest, loudest and most influential advocates for climate change action.
We need to get over our sense of insignificance. We can be the solution, we need to be the solution, and we are the solution.
So let's move on to some brighter thoughts about the future. So I'd like to speak a little bit about what Ambulance Victoria are doing in this space. We've launched a social and environmental responsibility framework probably 2.5 years ago now, and I was one of the resources who came on to roll that out. It's got 4 pillars: our people, our community, our supply chain, and the environment. And it's backed up by a 5-year action plan, which has got probably 100 or more actions that sit in each of those pillars and are very much embedded throughout the organisation. So I'd like to, that's the kind of background for our response to climate change. Climate change was registered on our organisational risk register in 2019, and really what was kind of proposed was that we don't know what we don't know, and we need to find out. So this piece of work to develop our climate adaptation action plan was kind of took a good 18 months or something to really understand what the risk to our organisation feels like and what we can do about it. So the action plan is again a 5-year strategy, or 4-year strategy, sorry, that has various themes. We are also measuring our progress. You'll notice this is a dashboard really for the social and environmental responsibility framework and action plan. This is a half-one kind of measure, but you will notice under the environment section, emissions are part of that measurement. So measuring our emissions is very much a part of our response, and we do have a commitment to net zero carbon by 2045. We also have a commitment to 100% renewable energy by 2025, and a commitment to adapting to a changing climate, trying to really embed climate resilience throughout the organisation and increase the climate literacy in our people. Some of the wins that we've had our first power purchase agreement began in mid-2020 and that enabled us to reduce our electricity impact by 27%, which it was equivalent to 7% of our carbon emissions overall. So that was a bit of a win. That was all our large sites, 14 large sites onto a power purchase agreement. We've also been doing various energy efficiency and rooftop solar installations to try to reduce demand for electricity and green the supply of electricity. We have done a wonderful project to try and understand what a net zero carbon ambulance branch looks like, what kinds of design features it would need to exhibit or have, and how we would power it and that kind of thing. So we had a group of, I think, 14 students each telling us that that was very possible and this is how you do it, and that's started to inform our design and our dialogues with the Department of Health going forward. We have spoken a lot about, or thought and spoken a lot about sustainable fleet being the core business, and I'm sure you have too. Some of you guys are way ahead of us in this area. I know, having spoken to Canberra and I think South Australia, they're doing fantastic things with zero emission vehicles already. We're kind of more at the point, we've done some policy work to put a carbon cap on the emissions of the vehicles that we buy, the non-ambulance vehicles that we buy. We haven't got those options yet. We understand that they're close at hand in the future. The OEMs, we're always talking with the original automotive manufacturers to understand what their opportunities are coming up. We've got an electric vehicle pilot that's funded by DTF, which we're excited about. And yeah, we hope that it'll start to really get traction in coming years. We do a lot in social procurement at Ambulance Victoria. We see all contracts as an opportunity to improve our performance environmentally and socially. And we're starting to see some pretty wonderful stories come through that part of the business. We've also got some, lots of great engagement from our staff. I think we've got more than 170 sustainability champions across the organisation now. We've got strong engagement from senior leadership and more than 350 people on the workplace group that can talk about these things. We do newsletters, we have done podcasts, we've trying to incorporate sustainability measures not only at work but at home, and trying to kind of engage paramedics where they're at with projects that they want to do in their workplaces, and trying to keep it very local, very, very real, for people who want to make a difference, bring their values to work. Speaking of bringing your values to work, just I guess lastly to mention that we have part of our code of conduct at Ambulance Victoria is protecting the environment. So I guess staff feel very licensed to try and do well in, do better where they see it, to come to us and think, with their ideas of how to improve or how to make change. And that's very much welcomed in our staff. So I think that's all I had to share today. I thank you so much for listening and attending, and I've got my email there, but that's wrong. It's catherine.o'shea@ambulance.vic.gov.au. But yeah, I welcome now your questions.
Well, thank you so much, Kath, for that. That was wonderful. Really great presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll open it up on to everyone that's on, just to ask some questions in the chat. So people, if you can just send that through, that'd be wonderful. But I'll kick off. Obviously, it's really hard when you're in an organization and sort of it's a big organization like Ambulance Victoria. It's where do you even start? What I guess let's start from there.
Sure. Okay. Well, I think there's a quote. I hope I get it right, but where you are with what you've got immediately. I think it's just start anywhere really, and it's interesting that everyone is able to do something, and I think that's really important to acknowledge that. Whilst I'm kind of qualified to some degree in this space, there's so many things throughout the organisation that I don't see. I have no idea that they're going on. I have no kind of visibility on a lot of things. So really, wherever you are, whatever you see as an opportunity to improve, that's where you should start, I think. And that might be a process or a product or an opportunity, a procurement, that there's everywhere. There's millions of places to start, and really it's just a matter of looking at your kind of sphere of influence and kind of thinking, I reckon I could, I think there's something that could be done about that, and I'm just the person to do it.
No, I agree. And that's something that we found from CAA as well. So obviously we've done the strategy, and our point was, let's just go nitty gritty. Let's go little tiny things that every individual can do. Make a change when you're looking at your office, make a change when you're looking, at wherever you're working in an ambulance service or at home, and just start making little changes. Because I'm an avid recycler, and it I get annoyed when people put stuff in the wrong bins, and I will be the one moving them from bin to bin. So I think it comes back to us, and then it slowly grows. But if you had to, I guess, pick one thing that, was the success that drove, I guess, sustainability at Ambulance Victoria, what would you say that is?
Oh, it's got to be the commitment of the whole organisation, really. I think. Are you talking individuals or?
Oh, I think just as
Or
general, like in the
yeah,
whole of
I guess
Ambulance
let's
Victoria,
go.
there was, that one standout that you go, look, having that definitely helped us push along further. Is there
Oh,
something that you can pick
yeah,
out?
I really think it's a champion. Uh, whether it doesn't matter where that champion comes from within the organisation. Even before we had a strategy, we had the wonderful Simone Dark who just championed this stuff. We had a lot of rooftop solar and we did a lot of things just because she was very motivated to push. And so there was a lot of, there's probably 10 years of action of smaller things that one person was able to achieve just by, a bit of push and influence in our property services. So shout out to Simone. However, yeah, having a champion, I think, is really what it takes to put the case forward to say, what does this look like? What could it be? To engender a bit of a vision about how wonderful or exciting or improved it could be, and what the positive impacts of action would be, as opposed to the stick and the compliance and the government telling you that you must report emissions or you must do this. It's terribly dry. However, when you're going with a vision of what your organisation could look like and what would be better, maybe that's a good pitch from anyone in the organisation to try and influence a bit of enthusiasm. Developing a small group's always a really good idea too, to join with like-minded people and try and connect with half a dozen others that you can really start to think about a strategy, or whether that's a strategy to influence or a strategy to act or a strategy to find out more, to do a bit of research in this space. They're all really positive first steps for anyone to take. And also, I think for Ambulance Victoria, though, we actually had a very high level and committed executive and CEO, and we were very lucky to really have what it took at a high level to just really get started in a quite a strong way to do the strategy and to commit the resources.
We've got a question from Mitch. So on looking at your dashboard and your KPIs, you've got emissions per patient. Mitch asking, what's the biggest contributor to that number?
Yeah, it's interesting. So when I started, it was coming from the health sector, I was interested in what the footprint was, and it was 1/3 in road fleet, 1/3 in air fleet, and 1/3 in buildings in terms of emissions. We're talking about not ecological, not waste and water and all those things, but let's talk about emissions for a minute. And so I think we have about 9 air fleet, and they were equivalent to the whole road fleet, which is about 650 vehicles. So I was like, oh, right, air is a huge contributor to aeromedical emissions. So that was interesting. But really, I guess it's the core business of the road fleet. So if we were to be able to find a zero emissions technology for road, whether that's hydrogen or electricity or electric vehicles, that would be 1/3 down, wiped out off the footprint. We're going for the renewable buildings, renewable energy. So there's the other third kind of wiped off the balance sheet, and we're doing the electricity first in preparation for potentially electrification of the fleet. And then you're kind of left with the air, which is a bit of a problem, but there is technologies coming online. There's sustainable aviation fuels, and there is actually a very fast moving kind of industry for hydrogen and I don't know whether you've seen the eVTOLs and things like that. There's a developing suite of things that are looking interesting even for air. So it's very doable actually. It's not brain surgery.
No, and that's the funny thing when you start thinking this space, you start looking outside, and you're like, oh, I didn't realize. I just saw an ad from Air New Zealand that their commitment to going, really working in the space, and that's where I saw that there is already a fuel that is eco-friendly,
Yeah.
more than what they're using at the moment. So I think you just need to start looking past your borders. So,
Yeah.
question for you. Obviously, we all look to you guys, what you're doing, that. Who do you look to for
Oh, look,
inspiration or
I
ideas?
have a very active kind of group of colleagues. So in sustainability and sustainability in healthcare, I certainly join hands. We have a lot of knowledge sharing groups that we just kind of chat about what we're doing, and you can kind of get great ideas from others. I certainly look to the UK for pre-hospital services. The Yorkshire Ambulance, what is it? Yorkshire Ambulance something, is fabulous, very inspiring, and very switched on, and so generous with their sharing of knowledge. Germany too is another very wonderful and active service. They've got some really wacky and wonderful kind of ideas. They've got crazy pictures of all sorts of drones and all sorts of they've really done some beautiful visioning. But yeah, UK is really leading the charge, and that's probably a result of them having the emissions tax or emissions cap. So that forces them to have an understanding of the cost of carbon. Emissions trading scheme, that's what I was trying to think. And putting a price on carbon really helps you to bring it into that kind of triple bottom line costing. So now they're really seeking out carbon. They've got a commitment to net zero carbon by 2035, the whole NHS. Which is amazing or wonderful. Celebrate that. And so, yeah, they're going to have to work really hard to get there. And that's going to be of great benefit for us. Benefactors of great projects.
Yeah, and you mentioned, so for you, one of the things that you're doing, which I absolutely love, is you looked at procurement and sort of how you can change something that is a given. Obviously, you need to purchase the all these items, and sort of looking at that, and is that obviously intentionally looking for people who either have strong sustainability ethics, or are you looking local, or what are some of the key things in procurement that you're looking at?
Yeah, okay. There's Victoria has a social procurement framework, a government kind of well, I want to call it, I think it's a compliance that we need to kind of fulfill, but really it's not, because that's not why we're doing it. Procurement is really an opportunity to improve your supply chain and your resilience, your organisational resilience at the same time, because I guess that's two-sided. You've got opportunities, but then you've got climate risk. So, there's two sides of that opportunity or problem. And so in procurement, we do put a weighting within our request for tenders on the social and or environmental performance of a supplier. So they are already given a bit of a free run if they're better in that way and equal in all other ways. And my experience of social procurement is that those kind of enterprises are often economically very good as well, because they've looked at all those things. So yeah, I wouldn't shy away from considering social enterprises and because they also have the ability when they're really looking at waste, for example, and not producing it, that's indicative of efficiency. And if they're working with disability programs, they've got reduction in the cost of staff. There's all sorts of ways that these organisations kind of come up better in many ways. So definitely worth considering and weighting in your contracts. And for the smaller things, just doing a bit of desktop research and trying to provide quotes from at least one or two ethical suppliers as well as the normal suppliers. And then you've got your big things like buildings, and then that's kind of a specialised, there's kind of specialty sustainability areas too that you can there's frameworks to help you to navigate too. But procurement is a really big opportunity. I just qualified before when I talked about emissions. Procurement is about 60% of healthcare's footprint, but it's not something that we can directly influence. So it's not counted in your carbon footprint per se. So it's called scope 3, and it's just kind of indirect outside, but it doesn't mean that you shouldn't be kind of doing something about it or can't be very active in that space. So it's a really fun space, very satisfying, very rewarding space to be active in. Anyone who buys anything can get involved in that.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Kath. Anything else that you
pleasure.
wanted to share with our audience today?
No, just get in touch. Feel like we're a bit of a phone a friend because we have done some work in this area, and we'd love to hear from people who are thinking about this, and to maybe share, form a bit of a knowledge sharing group under the banner of CAA. I know it's something we've spoken about, Moika. So we can get on to things like that if people are interested. And thank you for listening.
Yeah, and thank you so much for just sharing your knowledge and passion. I think it's absolutely important we do have these conversations going. And yes, so we are looking at a CAA sustainability group. So hopefully not too long future, we'll have something along those lines together and just really get people talking. So anyone that's on the line now as well, just let us know that and reach out to CAA if you're interested in that as well. Thank you so much, Kath. I will let you go.
Thank you so much. All right. Have a lovely day. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. Have a lovely rest of the day, and hopefully we'll see you back end of July for our next webinar.
Thank you for attending Climate, Health and You, presented by Catherine O'Shea, supported by Neen by RAP. Join us for our next webinar on July 26th. The topic will be aeromedical, and it's proudly supported by Zoll. More information to come. You can view all of our upcoming webinars by visiting www.caa.net.au/webinars. Also be sure to follow us on social media to keep up to date. Twitter at CAA Australasia, Facebook and LinkedIn the Council of Ambulance Authorities Australasia. Thanks for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next time.